everybody, we're back to Mercy Watson. We're gonna read Mercy Watson Fights Crime by Kate DiCamillo, illustrated by Chris Van Dusen. Mr. Watson and Mrs. Watson have a pig named Mercy. Each night they sing the pig to sleep. Then they go to bed. Good night, my dear, says Mr. Watson. Good night, my darling, says Mrs. Watson. Oink, says Mercy. Most nights, Mr. Watson and Mrs. Watson and Mercy all sleep soundly in their beds. But there was one night when they did not. Leroy Ninker was a small man. He was a small man with a big dream. Leroy Ninker wanted to be a cowboy. But in the meantime, he was a thief. He was a thief in the kitchen at 54 Deckwood Drive. Leroy Ninker was robbing the Watsons. Yippee-yo, sang Leroy, everything must go. He grabbed hold of the toaster. He pulled it across the counter towards him. Screech! Went the toaster. Shh, said Leroy. He tossed the toaster into his bag. Clang! Went the toaster. Shh, said Leroy again. Screech! Mercy woke up. Screech was the sound of the toaster made when it was being pulled across the kitchen counter. Mercy Watson loved toast. She particularly loved toast with a great deal of butter on it. Mercy got out of bed. She pricked up her ears. She listened. Mercy heard Mr. Watson snoring. She heard Mrs. Watson snoring. So, who was downstairs making toast? Mercy went to the top of the stairs. She looked down into the darkness. Clang went the toaster. Clang was the sound the toaster made when Mrs. Watson turned it upside down to clean out all the crumbs. Somebody was making toast. Mercy went down the dark stairs. She headed for the kitchen. Leroy Ninker grabbed the blender. He grabbed the clock. He grabbed the cookie jar. Yippee-yo, he sang as he worked. In you go. He grabbed the juicer. He grabbed the teapot. He grabbed the waffle iron. And then Linker heard a noise. He turned around. Yippee, sang Leroy. Uh-oh. Mercy looked around. She did not see the toaster. She did not see the bread. She did not see the butter. Instead, Mercy saw a little man wearing a big hat. He was not making toast. Mercy was very disappointed. She was also very tired. She yawned. Good pig, said the man. He nodded. Mercy lay down. She yawned again. Nice pig, said the little man. Mercy closed her eyes. Yippee-ee-oh, the man said softly. Off to sleep you go. That there, whispered Leroy, is a big pig. He reached into his shirt pocket. He pulled out a butter barrel candy. He unwrapped the candy and put it in his mouth. Mmm, Leroy thought. It might be a good idea for this cowboy to hit the trail. He picked up his bag. He stopped. Ah, shucks, said Leroy. The pig was blocking his way. There's no room to go around the pig, said Leroy. There's no room to go under the pig. Guess I gotta go over the pig. Leroy stepped forward. He flung one leg over the sleeping pig. The pig moved. Leroy Ninker froze. Mercy woke up. Oink, she said. Easy now, said a voice. Mercy looked out the corner of her eye. The little man was on her back. Mercy stood up. Steady, girl, said the little man. Mercy shook herself. The little man slid forward. Whoa there, he said. Mercy smelled something. What was it? Butter! Mercy looked around the kitchen. No bread, no toaster, but she still definitely smelled butter. Maybe someone next door was making sugar cookies. Oink, said Mercy. She galloped out the open door. She galloped towards the Lincoln sisters' house. Yippee-oh, shouted Leroy Ninker. Away we go! Upstairs at 54 Deckwood Drive, Mrs. Watson woke up. Mr. Watson? She asked. Said Mr. Watson. Did you hear a noise? Said Mrs. Watson. What sort of noise, dear? A yippee-ee-o sort of noise, said Mrs. Watson. No, I did not hear a yippee-ee-o sort of noise, said Mr. Watson. You were dreaming, my dear. I was? Said Mrs. Watson. You were. Go back to sleep, said Mr. Watson. Mrs. Watson got out of bed. I think that I will go check on Mercy, she said, and then I will go back to sleep. Excellent, mumbled Mr. Watson. A top-notch plan, my dear. Mr. Watson started to snore. Inside the Lincoln sisters' house, baby Lincoln woke up. She went into her sister Eugenia's room. Sister, wake up, baby said. There is someone outside shouting. Yippee-yo! Did you have pie before bed again? Asked Eugenia.
I did not.
Said baby. I think you did, said Eugenia.
I did not.
Said baby. Go back to your room immediately, said Eugenia.
Yes, sister.
Said baby. Baby went back to her room. She got into her bed. She heard another yippee-yo,
Oh dear.
said baby.
I wish I'd not eaten that pie.
Yippee-yo! Baby, shouted Eugenia. Come back here immediately. Baby got out of bed. She went into Eugenia's room.
Yes, sister.
Said baby. Did you hear that noise? Said Eugenia.
It was a yippee, your sister.
It was, said Eugenia. You are dreaming, said baby. Nonsense, said Eugenia. Open the curtain. Baby opened the curtain. Together, the Lincoln sisters watched Mercy gallop across the lawn. They watched the little man on her back take his cowboy hat off and wave it over his head. Yippee-yo! The little man shouted. That pig is disturbing the peace, said Eugenia, and so is the cowboy riding her. I am calling the police,
Oh, sister.
said baby.
Are you sure it's not a dream?
It's a nightmare, said Eugenia. That's what it is. Next door, Mrs. Watson discovered that Mercy was not in her bed. Mr. Watson, she shouted, come at once. Mr. Watson came at once. Mercy's not here, said Mrs. Watson. Are you certain? Asked Mr. Watson. Have you looked under her bed? Mrs. Watson bent over. She looked under the bed. She is not here, said Mrs. Watson. Mr. and Mrs. Watson stood together in Mercy's room. What should we do? Asked Mrs. Watson. Yippee-yo! It's that noise again, said Mrs. Watson. Mr. Watson went to the window. He opened the curtain. He looked outside. Mrs. Watson, said Mr. Watson, we must call the fire department immediately. It's an emergency! In reality, Leroy Ninker was a small thief on the back of a big pig. But in Leroy's mind, he was a cowboy riding a bucking bronco in the Wild West. Being a cowboy is hard work, said Leroy Ninker. I need some refreshment. Leroy reached into his shirt pocket. He grabbed hold of a butter barrel candy. He unwrapped it with one hand. He put it into his mouth. Ah, said Leroy Ninker, this is the life. But just then the pig kicked up her heels. The pig bucked, the pig reared. Leroy Ninker lost his grip. Yippee, said Leroy. He flew through the air. I, said Leroy. He landed on his back. Oh, said Leroy Ninker. Mercy sniffed. There was that delightful smell again. Butter! Where was it coming from? She looked around. She saw the little man lying on the ground. She sniffed his face. That the little man said. That tickles. Mercy snuffed the man's shirt. He said again. In order to snuffle the man better, Mercy sat on top of him. Get off me, said the man. Mercy put her snout in the man's shirt pocket. She snuffled some more. Oh, said the little man. Help! Mercy found a piece of candy. She bit into it. It was sweet. It was lovely. It was very, very buttery. Mercy sat on top of the little man and chewed. A siren wailed. Ah, shucks, said the man. That's all we'll be reading for today. I hope you enjoyed.
Bye.